Welcome back to the freeCodeCamp podcast. I'm Quincy Larson, teacher and founder of freeCodeCamp.org, and today we're talking with Abbey Perini, who taught herself programming at age 27 and maintains large legacy code bases. But first, some community news. freeCodeCamp just published a new course taught by legendary Harvard computer science professor, Dr. David J. Malin. He's a legend. I'm going to have him on the podcast soon. This comprehensive cybersecurity for beginners course will teach you how to secure accounts, databases, and entire software systems. Dr. Malin also shares tons of practical tips for securing your privacy in an increasingly adversarial world. That's an 8-hour free course on the freeCodeCamp YouTube channel. Check it out after you finish listening to this podcast. And then freeCodeCamp also published an extensive guide to passing the Certified Kubernetes Administrator exam. This is a very popular DevOps certification. Bo Carnes, whom you may recognize from the guy who runs the freeCodeCamp YouTube channel, he teaches this course, and it'll walk you through key DevOps concepts. You'll start by setting up your Kubernetes practice environment. Then you'll bootstrap a multi-node cluster and your control plane. You're going to learn about Helm, high availability, auto-scaling, core DNS, and more. This is a free 2-hour YouTube course on the freeCodeCamp YouTube channel. We also published a full-length handbook on how to build high-performance mobile apps using Google's open-source Flutter framework. freeCodeCamp uses Flutter for our Android and iPhone apps, and it's way easier than maintaining 2 separate app code bases. This Flutter handbook will teach you how to efficiently lay out your apps with minimum widget rebuilds. You'll learn state management techniques, asynchronous patterns, image caching best practices, and more. You'll also learn how to use isolates and lazy loading to make your apps really snappy. We also published a course that is going to teach you serverless architecture using C#.net and Azure Cloud. This is a jam-packed course, and it's going to jam so many common microservice patterns like onion architecture, Internet of Things functions, so much more. It's a 5-hour course free on the freeCodeCamp channel. And if you want to listen to lo-fi music in the background while you work with lower data consumption than like Spotify or watching a YouTube video, like there's the Lo-Fi Girl channel, for example. If you want to do that, but at 64 kilobits per second or 128 kilobits per second with no ads, no authentication, nothing. You just open up coderadio.freecodecamp.org, click play, and music starts. And then when you're done, you just close the tab. No big deal. This is a free 24/7 stream of lo-fi music. Check it out. Code Radio. This week's song of the week, if you want to listen to something that is a little bit more involved than just lo-fi, which is by definition supposed to be in the background, check out Marvin Gaye's A Funky Space Reincarnation, released on New Year's Day in 1978. Tons of funky solos, a very laid-back drum groove, and Marvin doing some James Brown-style vocal punctuations. Great song. It's 8 minutes long. Just jam out to it. freeCodeCamp has shirts that are awesome. I'm wearing one right now. They are really tight. They fit your body perfectly. It's tri-blend, very high quality. You can get them for $20 shipped anywhere in the US. Now, again, we don't ship outside the US. You can just get the freeCodeCamp logo, stencil it on, screen print it on. That's cool for non-commercial use if you want to do that. But if you want to get the exact shirt that I'm wearing, this is screen printed by Rafael Hernandez, who hosts the Spanish freeCodeCamp podcast and also runs the screen printing business in Virginia. Go to shop.freecodecamp.org. And now for today's interview, Abbey Perini taught herself programming at age 27 while working as an administrator at an engineering recruitment agency. So she's seen the inside of recruiting agencies, and she has a lot of insights from having talked with both recruiters and with candidates as a result of that process. She's worked extensively with large legacy code bases, and she's going to teach you some best practices for how to manage these. You're going to learn how to hit the ground running when you join a company that has a giant legacy code base, perhaps in a language that you're relatively unfamiliar with. You're going to learn how to get employers to remember you and actually respond to you when you reach out trying to get a job there. She's going to talk about how she adapted to her adult ADHD diagnosis and how she stays focused and ships code, and how knitting and cosplay gave her a ton of perspective as a dev. Abbey Perini, welcome to the FreeCodeCamp podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's great to finally talk with you on the podcast. You're somebody I met at the Commit Your Code conference here in Dallas, and I just immediately was like, wow, she's got a lot to talk about.
I'm always surprised by what pieces of the lore surprise people.
Yeah. Well, first, I know you've done a lot of work with legacy code bases, and you've written a lot about maintainability and legacy code bases. What are some of the egregious mistakes you've seen that devs have made over the years with large legacy code bases?
I think one of the first things that makes a legacy code base is absolutely no documentation, no tests, nothing. You're just handed this huge pile of code and told, fix it, please. And that's a huge challenge for people because a lot of times these code bases weren't built with maintainability in mind. So things are intertwined. So touching one thing that you would think is totally fine to touch by itself breaks 12 things on the other side of the app that you weren't even thinking about. So a lot of times I see things like short-term contracts for developers, and they're just like, hey, we just need like a little thing added on and that'll make the legacy code base better. But because they don't have much time and don't have time to get familiar with the code base, it'll often be a rewrite of something that already exists in a second way, and you'll find that things pile up so that you've got one feature rewritten 6 different ways, and when you go to fix that because one place is broken, it's just chaos. It's a lot. The other thing is like dumping all of the code in one file. I've seen files with 10,000 lines of code being the main file, and like half of that was just global variables, and that tends to get very, very difficult to untangle very quickly. So those are a few of my favorites.
So being sure to actually like put some thought into how you're going to lay out the files. When you're going into a code base that you haven't seen before and it's big, sprawling, maybe decades of work has gone into this code base, how do you go about initially kind of getting a feel for the lay of the land?
A lot of times I will just start breaking things. Like I'll remove a line and see what that affects and how it is. But I approach the way I troubleshoot and break things and things like that as little experiments. So I'll come up with a hypothesis before, like removing this line of code will result in these things breaking, and then find a way to test that and do little experiments across the code base as I slowly figure out what's going on. And one of the things my very first senior tried to drill into my head was that it doesn't matter how long the name is as long as it tells you what the thing does. And admittedly, he was German, so they're a little more comfortable with long names than we are.
Yeah, and just for context, German is basically taking a bunch of like the equivalent of like Latin roots and slapping them together into like these giant words that look comically long to an English speaker, but are like totally normal and kind of self-explanatory almost.
Exactly.
To German.
Yeah, so he was like, all right, so when you write a function, all I want to know is what it does by the name. And that cuts down on a lot of like comments that people will leave or like necessary documentation, because if you come up to a function, the function says gets XYZ, then you're like, oh, okay, then it gets XYZ. But back to the maintainability point, if it does more things than that, that's when you need to start documenting or breaking out or things like that. I forgot where we were going with this question.
How do you feel about comments in code? So this is one of those things that's like a religious war, essentially. Like some people are like, you shouldn't have to comment your code, and others are like, the code is its own documentation. An argument people make, and then other people are like, it's totally fine to just take a lot of time to really explain your thoughts and leave notes as to why it's structured the way it is. You're leaving artifacts for future developers to read. Where do you fall on that? If you want to consider it like a, kind of a spectrum of like no comments to fully fleshed out comments.
I guess I'm in rehab. One of my favorite seniors ever, I want to be clear, love her to death, was like no comments in code. Never put a comment in. So when I came to this job, my current senior is like, no, I want to see comments of things, if that will help me understand what's happening. And like, I want the code it to be readable more than I want it to be short, or like code golf, if that makes sense. Code golf being a competition to see how many, if you can do a thing in the least possible number of characters. Um, and then I also came from a huge legacy code base with absolutely no documentation in it. So I think as long as you have a framework and an agreement within your team, I like, obviously I work in JavaScript, so I like JS docs syntax, which you can use in a bunch of different tools. Like it's pretty standardized at this point. So yeah, it's great if your functions, especially with like something like TypeScript, can explain themselves, but sometimes you come across like a business logic reason that you're doing something, and the function itself may seem kind of insane until you're like, hey, I'm doing this because we need XYZ to happen because of business logic. Like that's a perfectly fine comment. But if you're just like, the function is named well, the all the arguments are typed out, like it's like 3 lines in the function, like that doesn't usually need a comment. Yeah, it's one
Yeah.
of those parts of coding that's more a creative art than it is like a perfect science, and I think that's
Yeah.
why there's like dogma about it.
So just to be clear, uh you don't always have to have a comment, but if it makes sense to have a comment, don't
Yeah,
let some sort of weird axiom like hold you back.
exactly. Like if you in 6 months is definitely going to forget why you wrote this function, it's okay to add a little comment that's like, hey, I'm doing this for this reason. My seniors sometimes leave comments that are like, I know that this is not optimal. If you can figure out how to fix it, great. Until then, don't touch it. It works now. It's fine. Don't worry about
Yeah.
it.
Well, what would you say to a dev who's just been doing like their own small projects? Maybe they've been working with a small team on like hackathon projects, or they're just running a new Next.js app and maintaining that for like 6 months and adding functionality. And they've never seen a 20-year-old code base that has lots of programming languages and probably lots of dependencies that are maybe even deprecated that are kept in
Yeah.
life support, like through sustained versions of XYZ, or require a very arcane setup to get everything to
Yeah.
work right.
Or
Like
maybe not
yeah, how
even
would you
that.
prepare them for that?
Like it hasn't been updated in the last 2 years, so you have to update it like 6 versions and 12 packages and things like that. The first thing that you want to do is understand the purpose of the app, like what is it trying to do, and then break it down into its major big pieces. I like to draw out diagrams and flowcharts as I understand it, and that's easy to take to someone like a senior and be like, hey, where's am I getting all of this correct? Is there an issue in what I've drawn out? And I've had a couple seniors be like, this is great. Okay, we need another arrow here, and then this box does this, and then like you add this in. And once you've got mental models, and you can start just with bugs. I like using bugs the best because you're like, okay, here's what it should be doing. Here's what it's doing. How do I get it back over here? And to do that, you usually have to understand at least a couple parts of the app to understand how to get it into its right state. And I've always been a build to learn kind of person. So breaking it and using bugs is my favorite way of understanding a large code base.
Awesome. And when you document, do you use any sort of standard like UML or anything like that, or do you just use your own kind of like? Is this purposely just for your own kind of like comprehension purposes?
If you want to be able to add to documentation, which is the thing that I expect juniors to do when they onboard, like look at the onboarding documentation, tell me what you didn't understand, where it's wrong, because I have seen plenty of senior devs be like, oh, this Linux command explains everything. And it's like, I don't know what that Linux command, what do you mean? Like, I have to go look what that does and like figure that out. So I expect every junior to help make onboarding better by showing the missing pieces of what I assume you know, and be able to put that in the documentation. But when I'm doing drawing like diagrams and stuff, I could be using like I think there's like Mermaid and Markdown and stuff like that, and like there's always something in some tool that somebody's using at that company. I draw stuff out in boxes and Keynote a lot, or like anything that can make a black and white box on my computer. I have used to make a diagram at some point, because at a certain point it doesn't matter if you're going to keep this around for forever or like be able to work it into the documentation. Like you can always rewrite it in whatever the official method is that someone points out to you, but just the act of drawing it out and writing down that mental model. I also like to use an e-ink tablet, which is like writing on paper. So it still does the same like hand to brain connection to make you remember, but it's digital. So I can upload it to the cloud and then send it to somebody. So
Yeah.
any tool will work.
So if I understand, like two things I'm taking away from this: first, using like a formal kind of like diagram system, like universal modeling language (UML),
Yeah.
could be like an impediment. It's like, oh man, what's the standard way of doing this?
Yeah.
And that may slow you down, and that may also introduce friction, which makes you less
Yeah.
eager to diagram. And the second thing is a lot of what you're diagramming is not just for posterity, but it's the process of diagramming
Yeah.
helps you better grok the layout of the code base and understand the relationships within that code base.
Exactly. Like my very first code base I ever worked in had a ton of microservices, including like Google PubSub, which is essentially a black box. Like stuff goes in and stuff comes out, but like what happens in there is a little, you don't actually need to understand that. So what I was drawing out was like, does the daemon server go to PubSub or does PubSub go to the daemon server? Or like what order does it happen in? And those are the things that I needed to get straight in my head.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Well,
Yeah.
I think you and I could talk about maintainability for a long time. If anybody's really interested in maintainability, check
Yeah.
out Robbie Russell's podcast. I think it's just called the Maintainability Podcast. He just
Delightful.
talks about maintainability and legacy code bases. Robbie Russell,
Great.
of course, the creator of Oh My Z Shell, very popular tool that a lot of Mac users use to kind of super user jazz up their terminal, stuff like that. Very, very chill dude who's been on the podcast before as well. I'll put a link to his interview if anybody's really interested in going hard on maintainability.
Yeah.
I want to learn more about you. So you are a self-taught dev, and you have a non-traditional kind of background for developers, and you've got a winding journey into building software. Maybe you can take us back to just early life and like ramping up and take us through the decisions you made and when it came to, attending university, all that stuff.
Yeah. So I went to a college preparatory school from 3rd to 12th grade. So going to college was never a question. You had to get accepted into college to graduate. And so it was never like, should I go to college? If I go to college, like, what is that going to do for me? No, it was always, you're going to college. So I went to Clemson and I started out in, they call it graphic communications. I thought I was going to be a graphic designer and they were like, haha, no, you'll be printing things for the rest of your life. And I was like, oh, I don't want to do that. And I was already in a psychology course and I was enjoying it. And through that, I had actually started already joining graduate level research. So my very first participation in research was as a TA teaching people how to like build cubes in Second Life because my professor was studying how virtual reality affected people learning. And so I was like, oh, okay, I can get course credit for teaching people how to build cubes in Second Life. That's cool. And from there, I ended up on a multi-semester research project where I would run the actual experiment. I would help clean and code data. I would help run the statistical analysis on data. And I actually helped write the paper. So I am published on a paper about how mental health stigma affects people seeking help. So basically, our opinions and the things that we say make people more or less likely to actually seek out help that they need for their mental health issues. And by the time I got to my senior year, I had been working with these graduate students for years, and I was like, I don't want to do graduate school. They're not making any money. They're miserable for a lot of the time. They're not sleeping. Like, there's a lot going on, and that's not the path for me. I'm pretty done with school. And part of that was being undiagnosed ADHD and college being easier for me than high school had been. So I was just coasting.
Yeah.
And as part of my senior year electives, I started taking yoga and I ended up being a TA for my yoga teacher and then taking an advanced yoga course and eventually got my yoga certification in Atlanta. And then I realized I had missed the yoga teacher bubble. Like there was no money there either. During my senior year, I was like, no, I don't want to do graduate school. And my advisor was like, well, I guess you're just going to get whatever job you can get. And I was like, what? Is there no path for that? Okay. And so after yoga teaching, I worked in retail in a pet store for a while, and then almost turned dog training into a career, which is kind of adjacent to psychology and could have been kind of the same path. And then I ended up getting a job in high volume MSP recruiting, which meant that I, by the end of 5 years, had been an objective observer in thousands of interview processes. So I learned a lot of lessons that turned out to be very useful when I finally was like, I can't do this anymore. My boss had known that for years. I had applied within and without the company. I got rejected from a job where I was always training them.
Yeah.
Like I was like, I can do this role because I am usually training them on half the job. And they said something like, well, you don't have enough Excel experience. And I was like, I can learn Excel. What do you mean? So I was looking at data science, and that required more school, and I didn't really want to go back to school. And like, then my husband looked at me and he was like, well, what about web development? You like colors. You can move boxes around pixel by pixel. That would probably be good for you.
Yeah. That's a very simplified view of web development, but
you know, it was enough for me to start looking and investigate. And I was like, okay. And I committed to a boot camp, and that was in March of 2020. And I got pre-work from the teacher that I was originally supposed to be with. And so for 6 months, I studied web development basically in a vacuum. And because nobody was hiring, because it was March 2020, I also was basically getting paid to learn to code 8 hours a day. And this is the conversation about how we met, where I was like, oh yeah, you know, like I tried like the kind of like sandboxy, like learn how to code Python things before, but it wasn't until I was like struggling in the command line and something finally printed out that I was like, yes, this is it. This is what I want to do. The struggle and then the payoff. That's where I love to be. And then I did boot camp, and that was like drinking from a fire hose, made a few good friends there. And then January 2021 is when my boot camp ended, and I was like, all right, let's get the job. And I wasn't getting any bites on my applications when I was using like a template. So I started rewriting my portfolio and writing about rewriting my portfolio, because I had been challenged to write during boot camp by the boot camp instructor. And I had seen some traction on a couple of my blogs already. And I was like, well, this is clearly like a second portfolio, so I'll keep writing. And it was one of my former bosses saw my post about writing or rewriting my portfolio and put my resume in front of the CTO at my old company, and my old company ended up hiring me back. And that's how I got my first developer job. And it took me I got the job in April of 2021. I got the job in March of 2021. I started in April of 2021. So it took me about a year to do it.
That's great. Man, so many questions to dive in. First, Clemson University, great school, very selective. I think it's South Carolina?
South Carolina. Yeah.
Okay. I was getting Carolina and Dakota mixed up. Yeah. I'm like, South Dakota or South Carolina? I can't remember. One is much colder than the other. So
true.
That's cool. That's a good school. It sounds like your prep school served you well to get you over there. It also sounds like they had very kind of like parochial type of education, if they're like teaching you that sort of stuff. So you switched majors a few times, and it sounds like that helped as well. That you were like, you had your antennas up to realize, oh wow, this is not what I want to be doing, and you were able to pivot pretty quickly without racking up tons of additional, school years worth of student debt and stuff. The other questions that came up, you attended the boot camp, which boot camps were this thing. Basically, I talk about them in the past tense because I don't know if anybody still goes to them, but they have been helpful for some people, and there are some good ones. It's not all just a bunch of graft, but there is a lot of that too. Can you talk about like what your experience was like at a boot camp for people who may feel like they're missing out on that experience, and then how much that experience helped you, and whether you'd recommend it for other people?
Yeah. So when I started the boot camp, I still had no idea that I had ADHD, and I knew that I needed structure and I needed accountability. I needed someone to be like, hey, you haven't finished your work. The other part that I did not consciously realize is I'm a highly competitive person. So if there are other people in the class, I'm going to be like, I want an A. give me an A, whatever that means.
So extrinsic pressure from competition.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Also, very
And
quickly before you continue, I said a lot of them are graft. They're I meant the word grift. Grift is
okay.
a scam. Graft is
Yes.
bribing somebody.
Oh,
They're
okay.
different. They're different words, and I just want to make sure people know I know the difference, and I just misspoke. Okay,
I was like,
please
skin
continue.
graft. That's sure. All right, whatever.
Well, yeah, this is the good kind of graft. The graft
Yeah.
you never want, but the kind that will be very helpful if you need it.
Yeah. Not the other type of graft. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that they were a graft. I would say that 4 months is a very short amount of time to learn the amount of things that you need to learn to work on a job as a web developer. And there were a lot of people in my course who had signed up 3 days before, and like I had been studying for 6 months, so they were like, wow, do you have like programming experience? And I was like, no, this I've been working on this. And there were a lot of things where I was like, I'm finding it difficult to keep up. I cannot imagine like if I had just started this like 3 days before, because I already have a lot of the terms. I've already, created a virtual environment on a Mac to be able to run Python, like all of those kinds of things. Studied command line. Like there's a lot of jargon, like a lot of vocabulary that you need to know just to be able to have a conversation about the things that you need to learn. And this is a thing that a lot of people, when trying to teach juniors and beginners forget entirely. Like you can say a word and 5 of those words I need to go look up. That's a really difficult sentence for me. And I found that once we got to like career services, like we need to find a job. Career services tried, but I had all of the recruiting experience, so I was like, here's how to do it.
Yeah.
Here's
Okay, so you were better prepared to just go on your own without making use of career services.
Which is why when people talk to me about it, I don't recommend a bootcamp. I recommend a program like Leon's, like 100 Devs. Where,
100 Devs.
He has a structure. He has a community. He has that accountability, but you don't have to rack up debt or pay an exorbitant fee out of pocket. And you don't have to do it in 4 months or that's it. You've failed the program or whatever. And I, as someone who has done a lot of school, was like, there weren't like tests. There were projects that we had to turn in, but they were group projects. So like people could coast and stuff like that. So, it's, if I went back, I would probably do a bunch more research. I don't know if 100 Devs, when did 100 Devs start? Was it 2020?
It started during the pandemic. So
Okay.
it would have been after your time going through this process.
Yeah. So 100 Devs wasn't an option for me, but it's an option for you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'll second, like I have a very high opinion of Leon and the work he's doing for the community. It doesn't cost you a thing. The risk is your time, but anything you do to invest time in learning, you are risking your time. Like freeCodeCamp is free, but you do have to actually spend time, which is more than a lot of people have the means to do. But it's just a question of priorities and a question of like mapping out and planning and making the time is what I would argue. So would you recommend going to a boot camp in 2025, or would you just recommend 100 Devs?
Just 100 Devs, or even learning on your own if you're someone who doesn't need the structure and accountability to make sure that you're learning every day. I know I watched Dom's episode of this podcast a few days ago, and he talked about, just every day was like, can I move the bar a little bit forward? Like, can I do a little bit of that? And that's really what it was for me. It was a full year of like every single day I am doing something to learn. And I think you can still see like my entire stack of note cards that I made because every time I didn't know a word, I would write it down. Like I used every study tool in my arsenal that I had ever learned, and that paid off when I was getting like the interview quizzes and things like that when I was doing the job search.
Yeah. Well, I want to dive deeper into your experience as a recruiter and like sifting through all these resumes and working with other recruiters and try to better understand and empathize with recruiters. I think in many respects, and actually agree or disagree, recruiters are kind of the unsung heroes of the tech labor market in the sense that like they are providing service like that is essentially picked up by the employer rather than the person who's seeking a job. So it's in many ways, it's free help. Now there are no free lunches in economics. And I know that like the compensation that they're paying the recruiter, like some of that theoretically could have gone to you being able to get a higher salary if you just applied directly and not had a recruiter in the middle. but I'm actually not sure if that actually plays out that way in practice.
Yeah.
Can you talk about recruiters and their incentives and how they operate a little bit?
Absolutely. There is a vast difference between somebody who is recruiting at the company that they are employed by and an external recruiter that is a company entirely of recruiters. I worked at the second type, and I was an admin. So I had a flat hourly wage. I did not get a commission if I got people hired. My job was from the moment that they got an interview requested all the way through after we hired them and they needed something. So at any point in time, I had 150 people who could call me up and be like, hey, what's going on with my interview process or my paycheck or whatever? And I would have to send them off to the right person. The other part that I did was, so I said high volume MSP. There would be a...
What's MSP?
A managed service provider. So a third party would have a website that we would get email notifications from and be able to go into, and they would post all of the jobs that they needed. So I worked with large contractor workforces like Google's and other large companies that maintained just so many contractors that there was always a contractor job coming up.
Yeah. So what you're describing is kind of like Robert Half, or like account temps is one that I did after college.
Yeah.
Working as a temporary accountant, and like people are like, hey, we need somebody who can do account keeping and clerical work and tax filings and stuff like that.
I worked with physical engineering. So I was everything from picker packers, technicians to RFID engineers, industrial engineers, civil engineers, and contracts could be anywhere from 3 months to 2 years. They would be long, the benefits would be different, but the whole idea was that these contractors were employed by our company, not the company that they were working at. So there was, a bit of little wiggle room for companies not to compensate them the same, not give them benefits, stuff like that. So any company that works a large contractor workforce like that, I'm always kind of a little suspicious of. It's one of the first things I think about. But because of that, because I had no stake in the game, I didn't get a commission if they got hired. I was the person a lot of times that these third parties in between us and the client would come and be like, all right, what's your read? What do you think? And so people who had been nice to me, I would, give them the hard sell if I was asked, or I would do a lot of things to make sure that they stayed up on top of the pile and that we were constantly like, hey, what's the feedback? What's the feedback? So one of my biggest tricks for people is at the end of an interview, you ask when you should expect feedback, and then you email them if you do not get feedback on that timeline, and then you follow up every 24 hours until you get feedback. And people stare at me like I'm insane when I tell them this, and I'm like, no, you can extremely polite, like, hello, I'm just following up. Have you heard anything? But just doing that keeps your name at the top of the pile for somebody. And then that means that they're also having to be like, hey, can I follow up on this person? Remember, this person is waiting for feedback, like that kind of stuff. As far as
squeaky wheel gets the grease, as they say.
Exactly.
It may sound absurd. It may sound like, oh, I'm imposing upon them. I'm annoying the hell out of them. But it is kind of true. Like, people forget about stuff. If you want to stand out, just merely, being high frequency,
being polite and in their minds. Yeah. And I know that some people will swear by your resume has to look a certain way, your cover letter has to look a certain way, blah, 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 blah. And as far as I've been able to tell, all you have to do is convince the people that you're talking to that you can do the job and remind them that you're waiting for feedback. One of my favorite things is a thank you note. After every interview, if you are walking out of the interview and you're like, oh my God, I wish I had said that. That's something to put in a thank you note immediately following up after the interview with just an email, an attachment. One of the stupidest things I've seen is people who have cover letters and thank you notes, and they have them in templates, and they don't fill out their little template things perfectly every time. So it'll be like, hello, hiring manager. I, person, would love to do that. And it's just like, you guys, you got to proofread. You got to make sure that what you're sending people is a good look for you, essentially, not like a bunch of typos and leaving your little brackets in your template and things like that.
Yay or nay to having LLMs customize your cover letters?
I mean, if you proofread, you can use AI, but it's got to be right. So, I don't know. I don't have much experience with that, so maybe
Okay.
it'd be great.
Okay. Well,
Oh,
yeah,
but to your
that's
point
helpful.
about recruiters being, the unsung heroes, there are plenty of stories of recruiters who have zero idea what they're talking about like technologies, and people get really mad at them. And it's like, yes, absolutely. If you're recruiting in an industry, you should be knowledgeable about what you're recruiting for. But also, a lot of recruiters don't have the time or capability for that, right? They have a bunch of things coming across their desk, they have a lot of things. So the best thing you can do is educate them, which sounds ridiculous, but like if they say something wrong to you, you can be like, no, this language is different from this language. And then they're going to be a better advocate for you when they go back to the hiring manager about why you're a good fit.
Yeah.
But
And one thing you said earlier, just being nice to people.
yeah,
You
yeah,
prefer to help people who are nice to you. There's the saying, mind the gatekeeper.
yeah,
And in a way, you're kind of a gatekeeper to the resources of time and expertise and stuff that like a
exactly.
candidate might have access to. So similarly with a recruiter, if you're polite to the recruiter and maybe say, oh, actually that's a common misconception. Let me clarify
Yeah,
this for you so that you look more well-versed in this when you're talking to other people. Like they're
yeah,
going to probably appreciate that you kind of put yourself out there and took a risk, frankly, of politely correcting them with good intentions. Like I
yeah.
certainly would. If somebody corrects me and they do it in a polite way, I'm like really grateful.
Yeah. And the other thing is, it's the same thing, keeping your mind on top of the stack. So if you're, I know people like hate ATSs, but
Yeah, applicant
they,
tracking systems.
yes, if you get your resume in with the keywords, when another job with those keywords comes up, your resume is pulled up as part of like, that's what an applicant tracking system is. So I know, I recommend networking over just tossing your resume into the void, but I wouldn't see any application as just like, oh, I've wasted my time on that because I didn't hear back on that specific application. You may hear back from the same company 3 months from now with a job that's a better fit for your skills because you had entered your resume in at that time. That's obviously the long game if you have
Yeah.
the time,
Well, everybody
but
should be
like,
playing the long game, in my humble opinion. That's very heartening to hear that like
yeah,
employers are actually like keeping that in a database and referencing it, matching it against future opportunities. So it could be that these people are like, I'm going to spend 2 weeks and I'm going to do 1,000 applications.
yep,
Well, like you finally get a job offer, but then like a few months later, you're getting a whole bunch of other people calling you. Like, I already have a job.
yeah.
Well, maybe just
But
space it out a
then,
little bit, right?
yeah, but then like,
Buffer some like a few months in advance. I mean, does that sound like a better strategy if you're planning to be on the job market, or if you're on the job market, just pace yourself while cultivating other opportunities in addition to applying through
that
these
like
forms?
I think people see networking as like a transactional thing, right? Like I have talked to you and thus I want this thing and that we understand that that's what our relationship is. But I've seen so many people get jobs, years down the line because they had been in an interview with this person before and they were like, "Oh, I wish we had gotten to hire them then." My current boss, this is the second time that he tried to hire me. And so when he knew that I was even remotely open to something again, he was like, "Let's do it. This is the time that we can get this to work."
Yeah, that's
Um,
an interesting point. So it could be that, like, for example, there are like a lot of people that have to sign off on a person, and somebody else on the team blocked a candidate that person felt was really good, but they didn't have the leverage to advocate for that person or override that other person in their organization. But when they're running the show, when they're
yeah,
the sole hiring manager, or when they're with a different cadre of people, that they're gonna remember you favorably
yeah.
from an interview. So yeah, like I guess what you're saying gives me hope that people aren't just spinning their wheels and that they are making progress, even if that progress is invisible.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing that we talked about with studying. Like every day you're moving the bar forward a little bit by a little bit. The best advice I got during my job search was from one of my mentors about how every interview is practice for the one that works. And they were absolutely right. Like the one that worked, I was like, I've heard this question before. I've done this. I know this. From all of these interviews, all of the pieces have fallen together and I have finally done it. Except, at the time I was laying on the floor afterwards going, "Oh my God, I bombed that interview. It was so many questions." I don't know. And that was the one that worked. It was the one that I was on the top of my game. I was ready. Like I was hungry and I knew I wanted it. And finally the stars aligned. It's so much luck in tech, unfortunately, and like just being there at the right time, that all you can do is make sure that you're ready at the right time. And the other thing, back to recruiters not knowing like different technologies and stuff, the number of times that we had to go back to hiring managers and be like, here's the job description you gave us. And they're like, well, that's not going to get me the candidates I want. And we're like, okay, so let's rewrite it to actually bring in the candidates that you want to see. It got to the point where we had candidates print out the job description that they had applied to and take it into the interview with them, so that if somebody was like, wow, you're really not a fit for this, they could slide it across the table and they could be oh, I don't know.
That's a good tip.
So,
That's a very useful tip. That is very counterintuitive. So bring the actual form. I'm writing this.
Yeah, bring the job description that you are speaking to. There are a few things in preparing for interviews that I recommend. One is looking up like the core values of the company and trying to work those into your answers. The other one is bring in the job description and like point towards things on the job description that you're like, I've done this before, like I can do this, I can do that. But also apply if even one bullet point like applies to you, because that hiring manager may just have just like, it's their wish list of like the 10x engineer that doesn't exist. And then all they really need is someone who knows React. So if that's what you know, like you can get your foot in the door, and it doesn't matter if you don't know the other 12 bullet points on the description.
Yeah. And just a note on understanding the company culture. Like a lot of that propagates down from the founder. Like Amazon, they carry around I think it's like the 14 rules that Jeff Bezos came up with. A lot of times the founder will have written a book, like in the case of Netflix, and you can read that, and then you can kind of understand the culture. And if you're like showing that, like, hey, I took the initiative of actually reading the book that the founder wrote, if you can find a way to subtly work that in, that will give people, probably positive feedback that you care about culture and that you perceive it to be an issue, and that you don't just perceive this to be a job like any other job. I'm just looking for a paycheck, because employers don't like that kind of like forthright pragmatism, I guess, or mercenary nature.
It's totally valid for that to be your reason to want a job, but we're trying to convince the people that you'll fit in and like do the work and all of that. And come with questions. Like if you don't have any questions for the company that you're interviewing, because you're also interviewing them, that is often seen as a red flag. Like you're not interested, you don't know what's going on. And like I've had culture fit questions that are like, what like, do we get together? Do we have like events together? Like, do we celebrate anything as a company? Like, is there something fun going on? And they're like, oh, no one's ever asked that before. That's interesting. And then once again, you're sticking out in their mind. So it's just one of those things.
Well, I just want to repeat what you said. Every interview is practice for the one that works. And I hope that people who are in the grips of a lengthy, protracted job search, especially if they've suffered a whole bunch of setbacks, I hope they keep that in mind, because that's very energizing to hear. So I want to talk a little bit about your ADHD diagnosis and learn more about how ADHD has affected your life, how it affects your work. How old were you when you got the diagnosis?
I think I was 28.
Wow.
And part of it was I always did well in school, so nobody was questioning it. But part of the reason I did well in school is because I was so anxious and like creating these like life and death situations that were not life and death within my head, just to motivate myself to get stuff done. And I got really good at, doing the homework for this class, one class before, like because I knew this class was easy and like I wouldn't have to do too much, so I could do the homework while the teacher was talking and stuff like that. And then again, I got to college and I was like, wow, this is easy. I get to sleep. Like I don't really have to study as much. And I just watched as I had been a voracious reader my entire life. And I just slowly got to the point where I couldn't even finish a book. Like I was so burnt out on everything, and I was like, okay. And like took this winding path to get to coding. And while I was coding and having to look at the way I learned and stuff again, I was starting to see some patterns that I had seen in my husband and in my brother, who were both diagnosed. My husband was diagnosed in college and my brother was diagnosed pretty young. And suddenly I was like, okay, so the tips and tricks that I've learned for them, what if I apply it to myself? And then those started working. And then I found a meme that was hyperactivity in adults, and it had like 5 things listed. And I just showed it to my husband without saying anything. And he was looking at the meme and then looking at me and then looking at the meme. And I was like, yeah. And he was like, oh no. And then I'd be, in boot camp or studying or whatever. And he'd come home and he'd be like, when's the last time you took a break? And I'd be like, oh, like 6-8 hours ago. And he'd be like, so you haven't had any water or gone to the bathroom or eaten? And I was like, yeah. He's like, that's not, it's not normal. That's a thing that we should probably be concerned about. And eventually I found the assessment form that most psychiatrists and psychologists give for ADHD people online. And I took it and I was like, that's a really high score. That's okay. And the biggest thing that I found was I started asking myself, am I anxious or am I hyperactive and I just need to fidget? And started investing in fidget toys and things like that. And I was like, wow, this is really different. This is making my life a lot easier. And the other thing was I put down expecting myself to remember anything. Because people were like, but you're so organized. And I was like, yes, my 12 organizational systems working in tandem that I have to like work on every day it's not working for me, but I am organized to you. So that's something that I need to unpack. And I finally made an appointment. It was COVID, so telehealth, and got the assessment. And she was like, well, yeah, you still have to legally take a test, but I think we can go ahead and like prescribe Adderall because it's pretty black and white. And I was like, oh, okay. And the day I took medication for the first time, I was like, this is what people mean by focus. Okay. And I'd been practicing yoga for years. I had been working on a second certification before the pandemic. Like, there were so many things that my teachers had tried to teach me. And I did yoga that day. And I was like, well, yeah, it's a way easier to focus on your breath and stuff now. Like, that makes so much more sense to me. So it was really partially coding and partially like social media that finally showed me that there was a reason that I had always felt like I was struggling so much more than other people. And one of the things that came up recently that somebody else was talking about was I was always trying so hard. Like, yes, I was succeeding, but I was trying 4 or 5 times harder than other people would have to do those things. And once I finally was able to unpack a lot of that and set it down, that's when I finally was like, oh, I can actually lean into the way my brain works and still get things done. So there's a lot of tips and tricks. And, the biggest tip and trick of them all is that one will always stop working, so you have to switch to the other one, and you can maybe rotate them out, but like it's always going to be a fun
puzzle. When you say one will stop working, you mean the ADHD medication or the methodology? Because I've heard that after a few years the efficacy starts to fade.
So the big thing that I think that people miss a lot with psychiatric medication is that the medication is to make it easier for you to introduce healthy behaviors. So it should never be the medication just by itself is going to solve all your problems. The medication is why I now instinctively go, I'm eating lunch, I should empty the dishwasher. Like, I've managed to train myself to do the things that, and like chain habits and things like that, that it was really difficult for me to even make a habit out of brushing my teeth every morning. And now I'm able to have like a full, like, brush my teeth, wash my face, like a whole routine and stuff like that. But that was me working on behaviors with the help of the medication, not just me relying on medication to make my life suddenly work better. But I mean, like, some days like a physical Pomodoro timer works for me. So like even with time blindness, watching time go by and make sure I realize that I'm hyper focusing, I'll set a 25-minute timer and then I'll go off and I'll be like, wow, 25 minutes just went by. And that helps me make my day's schedule go a little bit smoother. But then some days I can't do the physical Pomodoro timer. Maybe I need a browser window with a timer up next to the coding window, and I'll switch back and forth between whatever's working that day. I know you had mentioned living a stimulus-free lifestyle. That is
so. A couple
not
quick
mine.
disclosures, real quick. So first of all, we are not like clinical psychologists. You do have an undergraduate degree in psychology.
Yes, which means that I can tell you that I can legally not tell you what to do.
Right on. And I do have an ADD diagnosis from 1990, 1991. So I did take Ritalin, which was the drug that was taken by kids back then. It may still be in use, but I did not particularly enjoy it, and it was a short-lived experiment. I started kind of like hiding them in my mouth and then spitting them out as soon as my parents were out of sight, because I didn't like the way they made me feel. And to this day, I don't do any psychoactive substances other than caffeine. That's literally it. I don't drink alcohol or anything. Not that I am saying you can't do that stuff. Feel free, do you. But like for me, I like being super low stimulus. Like my phone's background is black. My desktop's background is black. I basically just have like this environment. Like you see this stuff behind me, but I'm not looking at that, right?
Yeah.
Like, I would never have like this cluttered. Like my view outside is just like a window, and it's just looking out at the cul-de-sac that I'm on and at the trees and stuff. And I just like to like, I don't listen to music when I work usually. Like I'm like super duper like low stimulus, I think is the term. Yeah. And so have you similarly experimented with such things?
I cannot have notification sounds on. Like if any time of day, it doesn't matter if I'm working or anything, like I cannot have notification sounds on. And people are like, but you're really responsive to your phone. I'm like, yeah, because my phone lighting up is enough. If I hear a sound, it's over. Like that is the only thing that I will be focusing on. And with the way that phones are made these days, like it's just constant. It's silent.
I mean, they want you to constantly be pulled back into it. Everybody's put push notifications on apps, which FreeCodeCamp, we're guilty. We remind people to do their daily coding challenges. But like,
but that kind of thing.
All that is good. Turn off your notifications, people, especially if you have any of these symptoms that you and I guess, seem to exhibit.
Yeah. And I'm super hyperactive. Like if I am not, if I don't have a way to be moving or like listening to music while I'm coding or something like that, if there's not a second thing going on, then I will find a second thing to be distracted by. So I have, a lot of, everybody loves a lo-fi coding playlist. I really got into EDM that my husband hates because he's like, it just, none of the noises make sense. I'm like, yes. That's the point. But I think I have like 15 fidget toys on this desk right now. So like I can reach for something and just like be fidgeting. If I need to like be in a meeting or something, I'll do a lot of drawing and writing and stuff like that. In school, my teachers would try to get me in trouble for drawing during class, except I'd be able to answer every single question that they asked me. So they eventually would just give up and let me draw. So there were a lot of ways that I found to fidget and get that energy out that were socially acceptable. And one of them is chewing my lips. So a lot of the fidgets are to not make me internalize it and to make sure that I'm doing it outside and not harming myself. And there are a lot of ways that like I will get so hyper focused. That's something I really struggle with coding, that I really struggle to pull my focus away from my computer. So there are apps that are like, I think I use timeout, where you can use HTML to customize it to show you whatever you want, but eventually it will be like, hey, get up, get away from your computer. I'm going to block down everything on this computer. You have to go move. So that's been one of the things. My PT is constantly like, stop sitting like a shrimp, move more, like use ergonomic stuff. So I have like a super customizable chair and stuff like that.
Yeah. What is PT?
Physical therapist.
Physical therapist.
I have a connective tissue disorder, so my bones are loose, so I have a lot of issues. Yeah.
Well, man, those are so many helpful tips for people. So I have some random grab bag questions for you. Very hyped. And by the way, if anybody's asking about like Ask Jan, like I'm going to put all those links in the description. These are great. So some questions that I have. You are a physical maker. Like for those of you who are listening to this rather than watching it, which is, I think, is how most people consume the podcast, is just listening it. You have a big rack of yarn behind you.
Yeah, they're made for storing wine, and instead I'm storing yarn.
Okay. But yeah, yarn is cylindrical like wine bottles, so it works.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it's just a lot of stuffing it in there. So when I was in college, I was having a really hard time. I was in a long distance relationship, like a lot of things were going on. And my now sister-in-law gave me a little booklet on how to make crochet dolls, which are called amigurumi. And I still have pictures of my sad little lumpy first little dinosaur guy and like all that. And immediately I was hooked because I have that style of ADHD where I don't ask how hard it is. I just want to make the thing, so I'm going to make the thing. And, might be a little disappointed that it doesn't turn out perfect the very first time I try it, but I'll just keep doing it. I'll just figure out how to make the things that I want to make. And so I started with crochet. I crocheted for a long time. My roommates got me into cross stitch for a bit, so I've done cross stitch and embroidery and a bunch of things. Actually, for one psychology class, I turned in a Rorschach ink blot cross stitched as one of my like tests. That was fun. It was a creative project. And then several years ago, I was in a yarn store in Asheville, North Carolina, and one of the owners of Pearl's Yarn Emporium, makes patterns, and he's also a dungeon master for D&D. And so he had made a pattern that was this big long scarf that had the map of the dungeon on the scarf with little charms for all the monsters. And that's how I got into knitting. And again, they thought I was insane because they were like, you're gonna have to learn how to knit and purl at the same time. And I was like, it's fine. It's still probably my best color work project, which is annoying, but it is what it is. And so I've just picked up, macrame during the pandemic like everybody else, all kinds of stuff. I'm really big into cooking and baking. And then in 2015, I machine sewed a costume, a Sailor Moon costume, and I showed up to my friend's Halloween party, and she was like, do you know what cosplay is? Like, have you been to the big fan convention in our town? And I was like, no, what's cosplay? And so then I started getting really into costumes, and that's the big, like, for me, there's so many different projects encompassed in it. Like one day I could be figuring out how to make props out of foam. I could be figuring out how to sew a type of garment I've never sewn before, makeup and paint and like all kinds of things. It's all a new project every single day. And somewhat it's tied into going to tech conferences. I have people who remember me from Render ATL dressed as Bombshell Batwoman, or the year we did Gandalf and Saruman. This year we did Buzz Lightyear and Woody and Jessie. And then at Magnolia Conf this year, we also did K-pop Demon Hunters, and I made the wigs and my friends made the props. Like it's very fun, and it's the same part of the brain that I use for the creative part of coding, because during bootcamp, I had to put it all down. Like I could not knit, I could not crochet. It's the exact same part of your brain. And that's when I discovered this very interesting history of programming and fiber being really intertwined. The first use of punch cards was the jacquard loom to make like patterns for tapestries and things like that. And there's a lot more. Little old lady memory is when MIT trained women to weave ones and zeros into wire so that it could be used in the Apollo to make the shuttle work. And like now we're even seeing the standardization of like knitting patterns is very useful to teaching beginners programming, because it uses for loops, it uses while loops. Like good pattern writers will use dry, do not repeat yourself, and then you get the output, like you make the output based on the pattern. So you can teach about like QA and testing from, okay, so I have this output, but does that match what I expected to get out of the pattern? Like, where did I go wrong? Where was the bug? That kind of thing. And it's also, I think a lot of people would benefit from the physicality of making and understanding that iteration, because I think a lot of people get frustrated when things don't work out the first time. Whereas like coming from that maker's background, that's what interested me about programming. That like, I'm just going to try one more thing. I'm going to try this. I'm going to try that. I'm going to get a new puzzle every day. Like I'm going to solve it. It's definitely the same part of my brain to me. It's not I'm a maker or a coder. Like it's the same thing. I'm a maker in both ways.
Yeah, man, that is really awesome. That there are so many overlaps. Like I didn't know that stuff about knitting, for example. And I'm going to link to the Little Old Lady Memory Project. Great name for a project. Very illustrative. I want to ask, what are some of the takeaways that you have from being, I guess, a prolific maker, making lots of costumes, other projects, and what you carry with you from that to coding?
So there's definitely an aspect of something like knitting where, okay, I'm in the knitting, I'm looking at it, I'm looking at every single stitch. I know exactly what mistakes I made, right? Like I know from a mile away that this part is messed up. And I learned pretty early on to go to like my husband. I can't do my husband now because I've trained him too well, but I go to my husband and go, "Can you tell me where I messed up? Like tell me
You
where the
train him in
mistake
knitting.
is." He can recognize machine knitting versus hand knitting and like all this different stuff. So he can actually like kind of see the patterns at this point. So I know that it really doesn't matter if he doesn't notice it. But for a long time, he didn't notice any of the mistakes. So it allowed me to let go of a lot of that perfectionism that was preventing me from starting things a lot of times where, oh, I just, like, I don't know if I can do this perfectly. So there's a sweater that I made that really impresses knitters. And I only made it because I had no idea what I was doing at the time. You either make it if you're really, really experienced or you don't know what you're getting yourself into. And like, I need to go back and fix it because I didn't know how to do a stitch and there are big holes forming, like where I put the sleeves on. But as far as anybody else could tell, like it was perfectly fine. It was great. And taking that kind of mentality into coding, especially with like front end. I have a whole talk on design for non-designers because a lot of people like back end people who are just getting started will see how their site looks like something from the 90s and be like, well, I'm not good at this. Like I can never, I have to stop because it's not perfect. And for a long time, that wasn't really a problem for me. Like the blank page getting started, I knew I just needed to slap something on there and get started and it would be fine. It didn't have to be perfect. And some of that goes into, the like user experience. Like if a user is going to care about it, then yes, I should spend a lot of time on it. But if a user is not, or a user or coworker or something is not going to be like, why is this not made exactly the perfect way? Like I don't have to waste energy on that. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
first of all, there's that like I think it's a like a curve of distribution. It's like a mean curve, and
Yeah.
it's a mean. So on one part you got the dumb guy who's like, oh, let's do this, and then the person in the middle who's like the median user of the thing is
Yeah.
like, oh, it's better to do this. This is the correct thing, and then you have like the really smart like wizard looking dude, and he's like, oh, let's just do this. And it's the same
Yeah.
thing as the dumb guy. And the people
Yeah.
in the middle are kind of overthinking it,
Yeah.
essentially, is the
Exactly.
moral of the meme, if there is such a
Yeah.
thing, right? So
Yeah.
it sounds like to an extent, like your naivete was one of the reasons you could arrive at like novel, interesting approaches, whereas
Yeah.
like a moderately experienced person would have just fallen back on the same kind of grab bag of heuristics, and yet the genius might have approached it like the genius who had a lot of experience might have approached it kind of in a similar way to you, or come to the same conclusion that you came to as a naive person.
That. And just the joy of creating is often enough. Like, I think a lot of people are like, oh, I need to solve world hunger. And that's the only project that's any good that I can dedicate my time to. And I'm out here like making cute buttons and adding like little drawings of my dog to my website and stuff like that. And I found that that sense of joy and creation and creativity is a lot of what feeds my willingness to do the technical parts. My senior's currently trying to get me to do config, which is not my happy place. And a lot of it I'm realizing is because it's not like creative and the errors are like weird and you have to go hunt things down and do a lot of systems thinking. But what I enjoy and what I have often begged people to let me do in a development role is just to like create buttons and do things that make the users feel joy and like stuff like that. Because I found that, especially in my writing, when I tried to write for other people, it didn't feel right. It didn't do well. Like it wasn't anything. But when I was following my own joy and just writing about and doing what I found fun because it was my free time, that's when people would also be like, you know what, this is fun. Like I am really enjoying this too. So I think there's a sense that you have to be super serious to be super technical, and that's not what like a lot of the developers that I highly respect, my senior Alex Revere, Cassidy, a bunch of people, they all really focus on the joy of creating, and that's what's carried them this far. Instead of yeeting the computer into the ether and then running into the woods to start a cafe or whatever.
Yes, the old giving up and going and farming goats
Exactly.
routine that many programmers have. We've lost a lot of programmers to goat farms. So let's say hypothetically you get, this is the final question. You've given me so much of your time and so many interesting insights, such as that a sense of joy and creativity can feed your desire to do the technical parts. I had to write that down verbatim. What you were saying. You're talking about how your manager is making you do config. I mean, every task needs to be done by somebody, right? Somebody has to answer the support emails for freeCodeCamp. Somebody has to review the AI slop, pull requests to our open source project, things like that, right? But how do you get fired up? Do you have any tricks for finding joy in something like writing configs?
Yeah, I think a lot of times I have to focus on what it is that I want to see happen, right? Because that original joy for me was, okay, I want to see something printed out in the command line. I've seen it. This is great. I want the button to do this. I click the button and it does that. This is great. So if it's something more abstract, like config, I have to be like, okay, so I need the project to run. Like, that's my goal. And then as soon as I reach that goal, I'm like, okay, what's the next goal? Okay, it needs to run with this thing in it or something like that. Rather than focusing on like, I need to work for this many hours. Like that doesn't work for me. I won't do busy work necessarily. But as long as there's a puzzle to solve, I'm really invested. And I think that's one of the things that makes coding so well suited to people with brains like ADHD brains, is that we get something novel. We get something that's been estimated and time blocked, and we need to finish it so that we can get the next thing. And all the systems thinking and getting to think through the big puzzle and all of that is what keeps me coding. It's not necessarily like, oh, I really just enjoy writing switch statements. Like that's not it. The switch statement is a means to the end. That's what is driving me to work, seeing the thing appear on the page, the creativity of it.
So if I could paraphrase what you're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong,
Please
you
do.
figure out a way to essentially set up a series of small wins along the way to whatever you need to achieve. You step backward. Okay, what are some things that are going to be accomplishments that I can celebrate along the way? So if you take that kind of approach, in theory, you could apply it to literally any work. You could shoveling coal into a furnace. I'll know when this train car is halfway empty, that'll be a big win or something like that, right?
Yeah, I do it a lot with chores. 10% is still progress. If I can get to the 10%, then I usually am motivated to get to, closer to 50 or 100%. But that first 10% is always the hardest for me. So that's the thing that I'm like, all right, you get a little treat at the beginning. You get a little treat when you get a little win, and then the little treats just keep you going through the boring stuff.
Right on. Well, Abbey Perini, it has been an absolute pleasure learning from you, learning more about you, and hearing your insights into software development. I think people are going to benefit greatly from this conversation, and also from reading your extensive blog, which I'm linking to, Abbey Normal. And I would encourage people to read your work, and hopefully we'll get some of it up on freeCodeCamp. I think we're fast tracking your editor application as we speak.
I'm officially in it. I just need to actually submit something. So here's my 10% for this week.
Your author application. That's great. We'll look forward to publishing some of your work. You're an excellent writer. I've spent hours and hours reading your work, and you're very good at communicating your lived experience in a way that's fun. It's really fun to read your work. So,
appreciate it.
Until next week, everybody, happy coding.
Happy coding.